Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Inside Man United. My name is Rowan Brennan, and thank you very much once again for joining me. As always, if you are new to these parts and you like the content, of course, please hit that like, subscribe, and notification button. Now, part 2 of our series. On the last episode, if you haven't checked it out, check it out after this episode. I run through United's defensive line on who I would keep, who I would give away, or sell, and then who I think would be the best replacements to bring in. So on today's episode, naturally, we're moving into the midfield area. Again, a very, very weak part of United's game, given the gaps and holes that are in United's gameplay with, forward players wanting to get forward, defensive players wanting to drop low, and then we just leave these giant gaps in the middle of the pitch, which was very apparent in a number of United games this season. You may have seen Jamie Carragher highlight this fact, and Erik ten Hag saying while it was true for half an hour in one game, it's something that we fixed, but it's been a very clear area of concern even since the very first game against Wolves, where they just stroll. It's too easy to play against United. We have the second most amount of shots conceded behind Sheffield United. It's relegation type form in terms of the amount of shots we allow teams to create and to get off. Now, while you can always say that's a defensive problem, it all stems from the midfield. And while pressing from the front is important, they have their own statistics that they need to deal with, which is obviously attacking. But the amount of pressure our defense is put under and the amount of shots that we allow to be taken against us is in huge part to obviously Ten Hag's tactics, but also to positional discipline and the legs that our players have in being able to carry themselves around the pitch and being able to carry themselves around the pitch for 90 minutes. Now, unfortunately, United, while we do have very good players in name, the performances are not happening on the pitch. And I think we should start off with probably our marquee signing from last year, Casemiro. His quality is in no doubt, and providing the amount of goals he has this season, always makes you raise an eyebrow and think, wow, he's got additional strings to his bow, and he never got forward and scored as much for Real Madrid as he does with us. So this propensity to drive forward is clearly coming from the manager, and it's paying off in terms of goals, but that needs to be in addition to what he's already doing. If you have a defensive midfielder, while it's great if he scores a couple of goals, it can only be off the back of him doing his defensive work correctly. Now, Casemiro has been weak this season, and you can see that his legs are starting to go. And even when he looks fit for the game, after 60, 70 minutes, he just cannot carry himself around the pitch the way a defensive midfielder for a team looking to win the Premier League needs to carry themselves. He's the wrong side of 30, but he should technically be in the peak of his career. I mean, there's this kind of boogeyman syndrome that people have around the number 30, that once you hit 30, that all of a sudden these cracks start, appearing, and players just start to kind of decompose, which is ridiculous, particularly with modern science, training methods, diets, and things like that. The number 30 isn't quite as detrimental to a player's form as it may have been in the past. And I've said this on a number of episodes. I went to go see United take on Lens in their last pre-season game in Old Trafford before the season began. And it was noticeable how slow Casemiro was. I wasn't too far from the pitch. I was maybe 20 rows up from the pitch, opposite end to the Stretford end in the corner. And you could see Casemiro really struggling. And it's a shame because he's a quality player who we've paid a lot of money for. And he's the kind of player you want to keep around because his class is... He was, for a long time, the premier, the number one defensive midfielder in the world. Him and N'Golo Kante were probably sharing that mantle during the peak of their careers. And they were both kind of playing around the same time at the same age, winning everything around them with their respective clubs. But it's time to say bye-bye to Casemiro, unfortunately, because while the goals are nice that he's chipping in with, when he does look fit and he can play, he can't play for more than 90 minutes. So with his wages as well, you'd be knocking, 1.2 to 1.4 million a month off the wage bill. And we'd probably still be able to get 20, 30 million for him from Saudi, maybe even more, depending on which club are buying him. If it's Saudi, yeah, we'll get to that level. I wouldn't be surprised to see PSG or someone from Italy coming in from Casemiro. I think he still believes he belongs in the upper echelons of the European game. I think Italy would suit him. It's a little bit slower. The pace of the game is a little bit easier to manage. I think that would be a natural progression. The bad news for United is there's no money in Italy. So they wouldn't be able to cover his wages, certainly. And they're not going to be able to give us a transfer fee, even if they could cover the wages. So Italy, while good for the players, not good for the club. So Saudi and PSG would probably be the names highest on the list. Now, there is talk that Real Madrid want to come back and get Casemiro and Varane. How much stock I would put in that, I don't know. With Camavinga and Tchouaméni, progressing in their careers the way they have, I don't see where Casemiro fits in that squad. Maybe he's happy to be a bit part player, come on for the last half an hour, see games out, provide experience to those midfielders and, go back to a familiar surrounding and maybe get a few more La Liga titles or even Champions Leagues under his belt. But it is time to wave goodbye to Casemiro. So for me, that is undoubtedly a sell. Next up is Scott McTominay, another player who seems to be doing the business at the other end of the pitch, but it's not his job. And again, it's masking his deficiencies elsewhere. Scott McTominay is an average footballer in a bad team. Excuse me. And while the story of it, he's got the right frame, he's got the right attitude, he clearly wants to make it at United. Everything about him screams, this could be a player. I mean, I remember even 3 or 4 years ago when he was injured, like we were kind of, if only we had McTominay. I think we were missing him in the Europa League final, or there was some games we were missing where we're like, if McTominay was there, we could have won that game. Now, I never bought into that kind of rhetoric around McTominay. I've always thought he's been relatively limited in what he can do. And he seems to be a guy that's not defensive. He's not offensive. He's not good enough to be a number 8. So you're kind of scratching your head going, what is it you do? Now, Scott McTominay is a good age profile and we could get some value for him. And I think a 30 to 40 million fee is absolutely fair for a player of his caliber. But unfortunately, he's a player that will not ever be able to cut it at a team looking to win the Premier League. He might be a good bit part player on the side. He is a poor man's Darren Fletcher, and Darren Fletcher was a average United midfielder. He had his limitations, turned up in big games, as McTominay has on occasion, but you cannot rely on McTominay to change the fortunes of a club in the long term. And I don't think him coming onto the pitch would strike fear in most teams, unless it's like 15 minutes backs to the wall and United are just pumping the ball forward looking for a goal, which he has been effective in. He's kind of been like Amaro and Fellaini in that regard. But he's not carrying the ball well. His passing isn't great. He's not got a bad shot. He's not bad up the top of the pitch, but that's not where we need him to be. So unfortunately, Scott McTominay would have to make way as well. Sofyan Amrabat, I think, has been the biggest disappointment in terms of midfielders at the club, because there was a lot of hype around him. And if anything, what Sofyan Amrabat has done is serve to give another and deeper reminder that the gap between Serie A and the Premier League is significant. And I have banged this drum for a long time. A lot of people get excited by players they see in Serie A. The leap is huge, and players who have been finished in the league, weren't good enough for the league, have gone on to have very good careers. Tammy Abraham was ripping it up there. Mkhitaryan resumed his career there at Roma. I think he's at Inter Milan now. Darmian, Ashley Young won a Serie A when he was surplus to requirements at United. Lukaku got his career back on track, and then when he got another bite of the cherry in the league at Chelsea, just showed that he wasn't up to it for a variety of reasons. And there's a laundry list of players that have come over from Serie A, even when Serie A was strong and couldn't hack the pace of the Premier League. So Sofyan Amrabat has been a major disappointment, and apparently has hugely surprised the United staff at his inability to adapt to the pace of the Premier League. And there is absolutely zero chance of us retaining his services beyond this season. And there's talk of Barcelona being interested in him. Listen, Amrabat is a fine player, has done well at international level, but international football is a step down from club football. It's just weaker. The football isn't as good. The players aren't as cohesive. They don't play as tight football as you would hope. Some on the upper end can, like a classic Germany team, Brazil, France, all the big hitters that you can name. But the quality of opposition you're regularly up against is weak, and it can mask a lot of deficiencies, the international game. So Sofyan Amrabat is another player I think United need to wave bye-bye to. In terms of players that I'd keep, I mean, obviously Bruno Fernandes, I struggle to support him as much as other Bruno fans have. I was a huge supporter of his in the first few seasons when, he was scoring goals and doing what his job is. But I think United's lack of strength in midfield, with maybe Pogba being gone and other players that we had that are now gone, Bruno has to kind of do a little bit more in midfield. And I don't think he's as effective in games because he's a little bit deeper. He's running around like a madman, trying to put out fires, trying to do the job of other people. And I think it's detracting from his forward game. Bruno Fernandes is a very, very good player and bordering on world class. And even, players like Kevin De Bruyne have come out and been like, listen, shots created and how many goals and assists he's had. Now, if you take away the penalties, of which he scored a lot in his first couple of seasons, those statistics may not be as impressive. But his numbers are undeniable. But they have been moving in the wrong direction. If you're the CEO of a company and you did well for the first few years and then that needle starts to go down and progressively keeps going down, you will be removed and you'll be replaced. Bruno Fernandes is living off a reputation that has been in decline for the last 18 months. Last year, 8 goals and 8 assists in the Premier League is not what you would expect from your main creative outlet from a team looking to win the league. It's just that simple. 8 goals and 8 assists, while fine, is just over half of what Odegaard, Saka and Martinelli were able to do each last year. And his assists were below all of them as well. And there's a lot of these shot creating actions. So then you can maybe blame the forward line for not maybe bumping up his numbers in terms of them putting the ball away and adding to his assists. That might be the case. But as many fans are now saying, and I've been saying this for a long time, the evidence of my eyes of the games I'm watching, I'm not seeing 2 or 3 or 4 amazing chances being created by Bruno that are being missed. I'm just not seeing these chances. I'm seeing very sloppy passing. I'm seeing a guy who is running around trying to do more than what his job should be. And I think I would like to see Bruno, now that he's approaching the peak of his career, being given a run at being a 10, staying a 10, in a team that has a good midfield behind him that's supposed to be doing its job correctly, built out with a very good defense to allow him to do what he's supposed to do. Take risks and allow the opposition to receive the ball again, but in the opposition defensive third. He's losing the ball in the middle third. He's causing a lot of chaos for our poor defensive team or defensive unit. And while I would keep Bruno, I think the jury will be out on him next year, depending on the midfielders that we have behind him. I think when Mason Mount returns to fitness, he will be able to challenge Bruno in that number 10 role. And Bruno does have an ability to play as a number 8, even though I don't think it's his best position. And I would like to see him further up the pitch. Now, he can play wide right in the same way that Mount can play wide left. Mount is ambidextrous and has both feet and is actually a right-footed player, so he can play on the right. But of course, the inversion mode is the way all managers want to approach attack these days. So there is a lot of flexibility in Mount and Bruno. So I'd like to see Bruno kept, but I would want to see a lot more from him. If his decline and his numbers continue to go in the direction they have been going for the last couple of seasons, and that continues into next season, I think it's quite clear that we will need to sell him while we can still get a price for him. And he's at an age where he still has longevity and a usefulness to another top level team that he'd like to move to. Mason Mount, again, I don't think he's been given enough of a chance. It's a transfer I didn't really want or agree with in the beginning, but he's here now. And the age profile he's at and what we paid for him, and he hasn't really been given a chance to show what he can do. I would like to see him in the team next year. He does provide a flexibility on the left, on the right, and through the middle. He's a hugely useful player when you need someone to fill in where there might be specialists that are injured. And Mason Mount should be more than a number 2 as a very reliable backup to cover for other players that are specialists in these positions. He should be a starting player, which he was at Chelsea, but we'll see how his form continues. Again, the jury is out on Mount in the same way as it is on Bruno, in my opinion, but I would want to keep both of them and see how things progress. Christian Eriksen, a player that I think was transformative for the team when he came in. I thought it was a very astute signing, one that I wanted before it was even announced. I thought this was a no-brainer given the type of player that United need. Can play as a number 8, can play as a number 10, huge amount of experience, and is the kind of, he's a beautiful player, and he can create stuff. He has vision and execution that a lot of other players don't. And he was brilliant in his first season. I think his fitness is finally starting to come up with him, and he is the kind of player now, like Fabian Barthez was. He's the kind of player that will take away as much as he gives after a time. He'll do some great stuff, and you're like, that's why we have this guy. That's why we need to keep him. And then in the same game, or later on that week in another fixture, he'll do something which will make you concede a goal, put you under pressure, and I don't want to say single-handedly lose you a game, but he will be absolutely a weak point in your team that the opposition will target. Eriksen is a fine player, but I think he has provided the most amount of utility that he can to this team, and I think it would be the right time for him to move on. I don't think he can go to Italy based on his condition. That's why he got the move from Inter Milan back to England, because we've got different rules over fitness and his heart condition, etc. So I don't know where his next move could be. Maybe to Germany, maybe to Portugal, or maybe even France. Who knows? But Christian Eriksen is a player I think it's time to say goodbye to. Kobbie Mainoo, it speaks for itself. A very exciting player, probably the best, most consistent, most calm, most high-level performing midfielder we have, and he's only 18 years of age. This is a player who's undoubtedly a future captain, and someone that we should cherish, nourish, and provide him an environment in which he shouldn't be the inspiration, but should be taking inspiration from other players. And you would think with the likes of Bruno, Casemiro, and Eriksen around him, this should be, Harvard level education for him to be able to pick the best bits out of all those players. And maybe he is doing that, and that's why he's playing so well. These guys have a lot to teach, but maybe they're just not able to execute as well as they previously have. Kobbie Mainoo, can't wait to see this guy develop into the player I think we all know he can be. And an obvious keep. In terms of players we need to bring in, I think we need to be quite intelligent in the type of player that is brought into the club. First and foremost, Joshua Kimmich from Bayern Munich, a team that seems to be in a little bit of disarray, management issues. We don't know who the starting manager is going to be. If Tuchel stayed, I think the opportunity to get Kimmich would have been vastly increased, because he's just out of favour in Bayern with Tommy Tuchel. But with him leaving, Kimmich might want to stay and see who the replacement manager is, to see if he can get another bite at the cherry. But at 29 years of age and having dominated German football for so long, won everything he can with Bayern, it might be time for him to kind of pick up a challenge elsewhere and see what he can do in another league. And I think that would be a very astute signing for Manchester United to bring Joshua Kimmich in, a defensive-minded player. He does play as a defensive midfielder. He's very, very good. He's able to progress the ball and pass the ball very well. He can also fill in at right back. He's a very, very good option. So when Diogo Dalot maybe needs to move to left back or is injured, Joshua Kimmich can go in there and play in a position he's used to. He wouldn't be an emergency transition for him. It's something that he's absolutely used to, and he'd be a very flexible, very useful, highly experienced player with a winning mentality that I think is an absolute no-brainer for United to go for. He would be affordable. And at 29 years of age, I think he's got the perfect blend of youth, physicality, experience, and hunger to continue in the game, but in a different environment, and see how he can test himself. So for me, Joshua Kimmich is an absolute must-buy for United in the summer. In addition to that, we've got Martin Zubimendi from Real Sociedad, a very defensive-minded player who's been doing so well coming out of the Sociedad Academy, and it looks like he might be looking for a move this summer. There is talk of Arsenal and Juventus, Barcelona are looking at Zubimendi as well, but a very defensive-minded player, doesn't like to push forward a huge amount. He does like to he does have an eye for a progressive pass. He can carry the ball, but he is very defensive-minded and is a player that I think is coming into his peak and is doing very, very well as one of the more noticeable defensive players in La Liga. And Sociedad, he will outgrow that club. And he is at the right age now where maybe, testing himself in the Premier League is the next natural step. So Zubimendi is a very defensive-minded midfielder. I think he would be at the right price point as well. I don't think Sociedad would be able to command too high a fee for him. And being 4 years younger than Kimmich, I think would provide us with a bit more longevity for a player in that position, which I think United need to do. Casemiro was, again, a very expensive player in the twilight of his career. It was never going to be a long-term signing, despite how much money we paid. And maybe Kimmich is going to provide us with the same issue in 2 to 3 years' time. But again, his versatility is very attractive. Zubimendi is very much a defensive midfielder. That's where he plays. So it would be a very good alternative, or maybe a better option than Kimmich given his age profile. But again, certainly someone I think is going to be on United's radar for that defensive position come the summertime. Other midfield targets that I think United will be looking at will be João Paulinho, one of the best tacklers. He's the best tackler in Europe, putting in an average of 4.25 tackles per game, playing in a Fulham team that needs a player like that. And João Paulinho, of course, was being targeted by Bayern Munich in the transfer window just gone, with the player keen for the move, but for a variety of reasons that wasn't able to go ahead. And he is yet again showing why Bayern Munich wanted to buy him with his performances in the league this season. João Paulinho would be a very, very expensive player, but he's at the right age. He's proven himself in the Premier League. It wouldn't be a risk in the same way Zubimendi and Kimmich might be coming in from outside leagues. The Premier League can be a little bit of a shock to these kind of players, but I think their pedigree should come through. But João Paulinho would be a lot more of a guarantee. He knows the league. He's used to playing the way I think United need a player to play, which is an all-action, bombastic, defensive, sticking feet in everywhere, breaking up play and allowing your defensive unit a bit more protection and that ultimate kind of screen before attacking players do hit that defense. So for me, João Paulinho would probably be the number one player I'd go for. Joshua Kimmich in at a close second with his versatility, experience and desire. And Zubimendi, I think, is a really, really good plan B in case Joshua Kimmich can't be brought in. In terms of youth, I think another player that we'll be looking at again from Benfica, we mentioned Antonio Silva in the previous episode as a centre-half option. João Neves is the next kind of generational talent to be coming out, and probably the one youth player that Portuguese senior managers are most excited for, and is seen as the jewel in the Benfica crown of players that they have developed over the last few years. A number 8 that can kind of mix it as a 6 maybe, but definitely a little bit more attack-minded, but your traditional box-to-box number 8 midfielder, and I think would provide a great level of youthful competition for Kobbie Mainoo as well, and one for the future, because the likes of Joshua Kimmich and João Paulinho, they're in the latter stages of their 20s. You need players like João Neves coming in, nipping at their heels, learning off these guys, and then getting themselves into the first team picture properly over the next 2 to 3 years. So João Neves is a good youthful option. João Paulinho as a good high quality proven Premier League tackler, with then Zubimendi and Joshua Kimmich in there as well. So that in total would be my midfield ins, outs and buys. What are your thoughts? Do you agree? Would you have different players leave? Are there any players in there that you'd like to keep? I know there are McTominay fans out there. People might like to keep Eriksen. Am I being harsh on Bruno Fernandes? And are there other players around Europe that you think we need to be looking at over the ones that I have mentioned? As always, thank you so much for joining me. If you like the content and you want to tune in again, please hit that like button, hit subscribe, hit the notification, and remember, the final part of this series is coming out tomorrow. Part 3, I review our entire front line of attack, who I'd keep, who I'd get rid of, my criticisms, my praise, and what players I think we need to bring in to fill in those gaps. And as always, I'll see you on the next one.